In the year 1068, an Arab geographer named al-Bakri sat down to write about a kingdom in West Africa. He had never been there. He gathered his information from traders who crossed the Sahara, men who returned with stories that sounded impossible. They described a king who could summon 200,000 warriors, a king whose palace was decorated with sculptures, paintings, and glass windows of his own design, a king whose dogs wore collars of gold and silver, a king so wealthy that the traders could not find words for it. The geographer wrote it all down and called the kingdom Ghana, but the people who lived there called it Wagadu, and by the time al-Bakri wrote about it, Wagadu had already been ruling the desert for more than 600 years. Welcome back. Let the day go. Tonight, we travel. We are going back. Back more than 1,000 years. Back to a kingdom so rich, so organized, so deeply connected to the world around it that it held power for 8 centuries. The Ghana Empire. Not the modern nation of Ghana. We are going further north to what is now Mauritania and Mali, to a place the outside world barely understood, to a land of gold. Tonight, we are not talking about kings and conquests. We are not talking about battles. Tonight, we cross the desert with a salt caravan. We walk through the markets of Kumbi Saleh. We watch gold being weighed. We sit with the people who made this empire run. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. The Sahara Desert is not empty. It never was. For thousands of years, people crossed it. They moved goods across it. They built networks across it. And by the 4th century, maybe earlier, one group of people began to organize those networks into something larger. The Soninka people. They lived in the Sahel, that band of grassland between the desert and the forest, and they controlled something the rest of the world wanted desperately: gold. West Africa was rich in gold. The rivers that flowed through the region carried deposits that had been washing down from the mountains for millions of years. The Soninka knew where to find it. They knew how to mine it and pan it and shape it, and they understood very early that if they controlled access to it, they controlled everything. By the 8th century, Ghana had become the dominant power in the region. The king, they called him the Ghana, which means war chief, ruled from a capital city called Kumbi Saleh. The city sat about 200 miles north of modern Bamako, on the edge of the desert. It was perfectly positioned. To the south lay the gold fields. To the north lay the desert trade routes. Ghana sat in the middle and collected a tax on everything that passed through. And here is what made Ghana different from other kingdoms. The tax was systematic. Gold that came from the south was taxed. Salt that came from the north was taxed. Every donkey load of goods that entered or left the city was recorded and charged. This was not a raid economy. This was not tribute from conquered peoples. This was trade. This was commerce. This was an empire built on business. But the gold trade had a secret, a practice that fascinated Arab writers and European travelers for centuries. The Soninka miners who dug the gold out of the earth did not sell it face to face. They used what became known as the silent trade. Here is how it worked. A North African salt trader would arrive at a designated location, usually near a river. He would spread his goods on the ground: slabs of salt, cloth, beads, copper. Then he would leave, beat a drum to announce his presence, and walk away. The local gold miners would approach. They would examine the goods. They would place a quantity of gold dust next to each item, what they thought it was worth. Then they too would leave. The trader would return. If he was satisfied with the gold offered, he took it and the deal was done. If not, if he wanted more, he took nothing and left again. The miners would return, add more gold, and retreat. This could go back and forth for days. Neither side ever saw the other. Neither side ever spoke a word. This was not primitive. This was sophisticated diplomacy. Two cultures with different languages, different religions, different customs, and they found a way to trade fairly, repeatedly, across centuries, without a single word. The silent trade kept the location of the gold mines secret. It kept the miners autonomous, and it worked. Now let us walk through the capital itself. Kumbi Saleh was actually two cities, separated by 6 miles. The first city was the King's City, a walled royal compound containing a palace, government buildings, and temples. Only the king, his court, and the priests lived here. The palace was built of stone and wood. Al-Bakri writes of sculptures and painted decorations. Around the king's neck hung a necklace of gold and precious stones. When he held court, he sat on a platform surrounded by horses draped in gold-embroidered cloth. Guards stood behind him, holding shields and swords decorated with gold. Even the dogs in the palace wore collars of gold and silver. The second city was the merchant city, 6 miles away. This is where the daily life of the empire actually happened. Muslim traders from North Africa lived here, Berbers, Arabs, in stone houses. They built 12 mosques. They had their own imams, their own scholars, their own muezzins who called the faithful to prayer. The city was alive with languages: Soninka, Arabic, Berber, Mande. The markets of Kumbi Saleh sold everything: salt from the Sahara, gold from the south, textiles from Egypt, leather from the Sahel, copper from North Africa, dates from the oases, cola nuts from the forests, ivory, enslaved people, books. This was not a backwater. This was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the medieval world. You are here. You are safe. The story continues. Let us talk about salt, because you cannot understand Ghana without understanding salt. In the medieval Sahara, salt was worth its weight in gold. Literally. A block of salt traded 1 for a block of gold. This was not a metaphor. This was the exchange rate. Salt was mined at Tagaza, a desolate place deep in the Sahara, 500 miles north of Ghana. Nothing grew there. The miners lived in houses built of salt blocks with roofs of camel skins. They ate dates and camel meat brought by the caravans. Their entire existence revolved around digging slabs of salt from the earth and sending them south. For the people of West Africa, salt was not a luxury, it was survival. In the tropical heat, the human body loses salt through sweat. Without it, muscles cramp. The brain cannot function. You die. And in the deep interior of West Africa, far from the ocean, there was simply no salt to be found. So the caravans came. A single camel could carry about 400 pounds of salt in 2 large blocks. The journey from Tagaza to Kumbi Saleh took 3 weeks across open desert. Caravans typically included hundreds of camels. The logistics were staggering. Water had to be carried or found at oases. Guides had to navigate by stars and landmarks. Bandits had to be avoided, and the desert killed anyone who made a mistake. But the caravans kept coming, because at the other end of that 3-week journey was gold, and the math worked. Now let us leave the caravans and the kings and the markets. Let us walk away from the center of things. Let us go to the villages. Most people in the Ghana Empire were farmers. They grew millet and sorghum, the grains that fed West Africa for thousands of years. They raised cattle, goats, and sheep. They fished in the Senegal and Niger rivers. They wove cotton cloth. They made pottery. They built their homes from mud brick and thatch, the same materials their ancestors had used for generations. Life followed the seasons. The rains came between June and September. The fields were planted. The young men took the cattle north toward the desert to find grazing. The women tended the gardens near the village, okra, peppers, onions. The children helped with the animals. At harvest time, the whole village worked together. Then came the dry months, dust, waiting, the rhythm of the year. Religion was woven into everything. The Soninka believed in a supreme creator god. They called him Bida, the great serpent, and a world full of spirits who lived in trees, rivers, stones, and ancestors. Every village had elders who communicated with these spirits. Every important decision, when to plant, where to hunt, how to resolve a dispute, involved the spiritual world. The Muslim traders who lived in the cities brought Islam. The king allowed them to practice freely. Some of his own officials converted, but the countryside remained firmly connected to the old ways, to the spirits of place, to Bida. This coexistence, Islamic cities, traditional villages, lasted for centuries without conflict. Another example of Ghana's genius for managing difference. Nothing lasts forever, not even an empire of gold. By the late 11th century, the very time al-Bakri was writing his descriptions of Ghana's wealth, the empire was already under pressure. The Almoravids, a militant Islamic movement from the north, began pushing into Ghana's territory. They captured the salt mines at Tagaza. They harassed the trade routes. Around 1076, they may have captured Kumbi Saleh itself. But it was not conquest that ended Ghana. It was the land. Centuries of farming had depleted the soil. The Sahel is a fragile environment. The grass that held the earth in place was overgrazed. The trees that provided shade and retained moisture were cut down. The desert crept south, slowly at first, then faster. The farmers moved. The villages shrank. The trade routes shifted east toward the rising powers of the Niger River, toward a place called Mali. By the early 1200s, Ghana was no longer an empire. The city of Kumbi Saleh emptied. The gold mines passed to new rulers. The caravans found new destinations, and the kingdom that had ruled the desert for 8 centuries faded into memory, kept alive by the writings of Arab geographers, by the stories of elders, by names carved on stones, buried under sand. But the idea of Ghana did not die. When the modern nation of Ghana gained independence in 1957, its first president, Kwame Nkrumah, deliberately chose the name. Not because the ancient empire was in the same place. It was not. He chose it because Ghana, in the memory of West Africa, meant greatness. It meant sovereignty. It meant a people who built something that lasted. And so, we return. From the gold markets, from the silent trade by the river, from the salt caravans crossing the desert under the stars, from Kumbi Saleh, the city of kings and merchants and 12 mosques, from the villages where women ground millet and children ran after goats and the spirits lived in the trees. The Ghana Empire lasted 800 years. 8 centuries of trade and governance and cultural exchange, longer than the Roman Empire, longer than most nations have existed, and it was built not on conquest but on connection, on the understanding that gold and salt, north and south, desert and savanna could meet and exchange, and both sides would walk away richer. The ancestors held this, and now you know it too. The story of the Ghana Empire does not end in ruins. It ends in the name of a modern nation, in the memory of a people, in the realization that Africa's great empires were not exceptions to history, they were history. And so the story rests here for now. Sleep well.